Captain Jake Morrison was 3 bites into his turkey sandwich when the emergency radio crackled to life in the cramped quarters of Station 7. The familiar static was followed by dispatcher Sarah's urgent voice cutting through the lazy Tuesday afternoon. All units, we have a water rescue emergency at Pelican Cove Beach. Teenage swimmer caught in rip current approximately 200 yards offshore. Coast Guard ETA 20 minutes. Local units respond immediately. Jake's sandwich hit the table as muscle memory kicked in. 23 years with the County Rescue Service had taught him that every second counted when someone was fighting for their life in the water. He was already grabbing his gear when his partner, rookie EMT Danny Chen, looked up from his training manual with wide eyes. "That's inside the Sunset Harbor Homeowners Association territory," Danny said, his voice carrying a note of concern that had nothing to do with the rescue itself. Jake paused, one arm already through his wetsuit. Everyone in the county knew about Sunset Harbor HOA and their notorious president, Margaret Whitfield. The woman had turned property management into a personal crusade, treating the exclusive beachfront community like her own private kingdom. She'd made headlines last year for trying to ban ice cream trucks from public streets because they disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. "Yeah, well, drowning doesn't care about HOA boundaries," Jake muttered, zipping up his suit. "Let's move." The rescue truck roared to life, its diesel engine cutting through the suburban quiet as they raced toward the coast. Through his windshield, Jake could see the pristine lawns and manicured hedges of Sunset Harbor giving way to the dunes that protected the exclusive beach access. Emergency lights reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows of million-dollar homes, each one positioned to maximize ocean views while maintaining the HOA's strict architectural guidelines. As they approached the private beach entrance, Jake's heart sank. A burgundy Lexus SUV was parked sideways across the narrow access road, completely blocking their path. Standing beside it, arms crossed and chin raised in defiant authority, was Margaret Whitfield herself. At 62, Margaret looked like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the ocean breeze, and her pastel pink golf outfit remained wrinkle-free, even as she stood in the sand. But it was her expression that made Jake's blood run cold, the self-satisfied smirk of someone who believed rules were more important than human lives. "Ma'am, we need immediate access to the beach," Jake called through his open window, keeping his voice professional despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We have a swimmer in distress." Margaret stepped forward, her manicured fingers gripping a thick folder that Jake recognized as the HOA's dreaded rulebook. "I'm sorry, but this is private property. According to Section 12.4 of our community guidelines, all emergency services must provide 48 hours advance notice and obtain proper permits before accessing our beach." Danny's jaw dropped. "Lady, someone is literally drowning right now." "That's unfortunate," Margaret replied with the same tone she might use to discuss a parking violation, "but rules exist for a reason. If we make exceptions for every so-called emergency, where does it end?" In the distance, beyond the dunes, Jake could hear something that made his chest tighten: screaming. Panicked voices calling for help, growing more desperate by the second. A life was slipping away while this woman played bureaucratic games. That's when Jake smiled. Margaret might control the road, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail about Station 7's equipment roster. Sometimes, the best way around an obstacle wasn't through it, it was over it. Jake threw the truck into reverse, backing away from Margaret's smugly positioned Lexus, while she watched with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a neighborhood dispute over mailbox heights. Danny stared at his partner in disbelief. "What are you doing? We can't just leave." "We're not leaving," Jake said, reaching for his radio. "Station 7 to dispatch. We need the hovercraft deployed to Pelican Cove immediately. We have an access issue." Sarah's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Jake. Hovercraft is fueled and ready. ETA 8 minutes to your location. Danny's confusion was written across his face. Hovercraft. We have a hovercraft. Jake's grin widened as he watched Margaret through the windshield, still standing guard like a designer-clad sentinel. 3 months ago, the county received a federal grant for specialized rescue equipment. Margaret here spent 6 weeks fighting the installation of our new beach access point because it would compromise the visual integrity of the dunes. She was so focused on blocking the ramp that she never bothered to ask what equipment we'd be launching from it. Meanwhile, Margaret had produced her phone and was frantically dialing. Her voice carried across the sand as she spoke to someone with the authority of someone reporting a crime in progress. Yes, this is Margaret Whitfield, president of Sunset Harbor HOA. I have 2 men in a fire truck attempting to trespass on our private beach. No, I don't care if someone is drowning. We have rules for a reason. Well, then they should have gotten permits. The screaming from beyond the dunes was getting weaker now, more desperate. Jake's jaw clenched as he grabbed his medical bag and started jogging toward the dunes on foot, leaving Danny with the truck. "Where are you going?" Margaret demanded, stepping into his path. "Ma'am, I'm going to walk around your car and save someone's life. You can either help or get out of my way. You absolutely cannot cross this property line without proper authorization." Margaret's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "I'm calling the police." "Good," Jake said, not breaking stride. "Tell them to bring a tow truck for your illegally parked vehicle." As Jake crested the dunes, the full scope of the emergency became clear. A teenage boy was struggling in the churning water about 150 yards offshore, caught in a rip current that was pulling him steadily away from shore. On the beach, his friends and family members were in various states of panic, some crying, others shouting instructions that the boy couldn't hear over the crashing waves. "Has anyone called 911? Jake called out as he reached the group. 20 minutes ago. A woman who appeared to be the boy's mother sobbed. "They said help was coming, but no one's here yet." Jake was already shrugging out of his street clothes, revealing the wetsuit underneath. "Help is here now. What's his name?" "Tyler. Tyler Morrison. No relation," she added quickly through her tears. Jake nodded grimly. The kid was still fighting, still conscious, but he was losing the battle against the current. In his experience, most people had about 30 minutes of fight left in them under these conditions. Tyler had already used up 20 of those minutes waiting for help that couldn't get through because of one woman's power trip. The distinctive whine of the hovercraft's engines cut through the ocean air like a battle cry. Jake looked back toward the access point they'd installed 3 months ago, the one Margaret had fought so hard against, and saw the most beautiful sight in the world, his backup arriving right on schedule. The SR-6 rescue hovercraft came screaming over the dunes at 40 miles per hour, its rubber skirt inflated and engines roaring. The machine was a marvel of engineering, capable of traveling over land, water, sand, or ice with equal ease. More importantly, it didn't need roads, and it sure as hell didn't need Margaret Whitfield's permission. Margaret's self-satisfied expression melted into confusion, then horror, as 12,000 pounds of rescue equipment came howling directly over her perfectly manicured landscape. The SR-6 hovercraft touched down on the beach with the grace of a controlled explosion. Sand erupted in all directions as Pilot Lieutenant Maria Santos killed the engines, the sudden silence almost as dramatic as the thunderous arrival had been. Margaret stood frozen beside her Lexus, her mouth agape, clutching her HOA rulebook like a shield against reality. Jesus Christ, Jake. Danny had caught up and was staring at the hovercraft in awe. "That thing is incredible." Jake was already wading into the surf, his rescue equipment secured to his body. "Danny, coordinate with Maria on medical prep. Soon as I get Tyler to shore, we need to be ready for hypothermia and potential drowning complications." Lieutenant Santos was a 10-year Coast Guard veteran who transferred to County Rescue when the federal grant program started. She began deploying the Hovercraft's rescue equipment with military precision, medical supplies, flotation devices, and most importantly, the high-powered rescue winch that could pull a victim to safety from 300 yards out. Meanwhile, Margaret had recovered from her shock and was marching across the beach like a woman possessed. Her designer heels were filling with sand, but her outrage seemed to fuel her forward momentum. "This is completely unacceptable," she shrieked over the sound of the waves. "You have destroyed private property. That machine has no business on this beach." Maria looked up from her equipment check, her expression one of professional bewilderment. "Ma'am, there's a kid drowning about 150 yards out. Maybe we could discuss property values after we save his life." "Don't you take that tone with me." Margaret's voice cracked with indignation. "I am the elected president of this homeowners association, and I am telling you that this vehicle is not authorized to be here." Jake was already 50 yards into the water, fighting against the same rip current that was pulling Tyler further from shore. The teenager had gone quiet, not a good sign. His head was barely visible above the waves, and Jake could see that he was starting to lose consciousness. "Tyler," Jake shouted, his voice carrying across the water. "Tyler, stay with me. Help is here." The boy's head turned slightly at the sound, and Jake felt a surge of relief. Still conscious meant still salvageable. Jake activated his rescue buoy, a motorized flotation device that would help him reach Tyler faster while providing additional buoyancy for the return trip. Back on shore, Margaret had shifted tactics. Since intimidation wasn't working, she decided to try legal threats. "I want your names and badge numbers," she demanded, pulling out her phone to record Maria and Danny. "You're all going to be sued for trespassing, property damage, and saving someone's life," Danny suggested helpfully while checking the medical equipment. "Reckless endangerment," Margaret finished triumphantly. "You could have killed someone with that flying machine." Maria's patience was wearing thin. "Lady, the only person in danger of dying here is that kid in the water. Now either help us or get out of the way. I will not be spoken to like this on my own property." That's when Tyler's mother, Lisa Morrison, stepped forward. She'd been watching the rescue efforts with growing desperation, but Margaret's continued obstruction had pushed her past her breaking point. "Your property." Lisa's voice was deadly quiet. "Your property." Margaret turned toward her with renewed authority. "Yes, this beach is owned collectively by the Sunset Harbor HOA, and I am the duly elected." Lisa's slap echoed across the beach like a gunshot. Margaret stumbled backward, her hand flying to her reddening cheek, her perfectly styled hair finally showing the effects of the ocean wind. "That's my son dying out there, because you wouldn't let the ambulance through," Lisa screamed. "Your property rights don't trump my child's life." For the first time since this ordeal began, Margaret seemed to grasp the actual stakes involved. She looked out at the water where Jake was now within 20 yards of Tyler, then back at the crowd of emergency responders who were staring at her with undisguised contempt. But Jake had reached Tyler. The boy was barely conscious, his lips blue with cold and oxygen deprivation. Jake secured the rescue harness around Tyler's chest and activated his radio. "I've got him. Deploying winch now." Maria fired up the Hovercraft's rescue winch, and the high-tensile cable began reeling Jake and Tyler toward shore at a steady pace. The crowd on the beach erupted in cheers, but Jake's focus remained entirely on keeping Tyler's airway clear and monitoring his vital signs during the retrieval. Margaret watched in stunned silence as the rescue played out exactly the way it should have 20 minutes earlier, if she hadn't blocked the road. Jake and Tyler broke the surface together, 50 yards from shore, the rescue winch pulling them steadily through the churning water. Tyler was conscious but barely responsive, his skin pale and cold to the touch. Jake kept talking to him during the retrieval, knowing that keeping the boy engaged could mean the difference between a full recovery and permanent brain damage. "Tyler, stay with me, buddy. Your mom's right here on the beach. We're almost there." The moment they reached shallow water, Danny and Maria were waiting with the medical equipment. They transferred Tyler to a rescue board and began immediate assessment, checking vitals, clearing his airway, and wrapping him in thermal blankets to combat hypothermia. "Pulse is weak but steady," Danny reported. "Breathing is shallow. We need to get him to Memorial Hospital now." That's when the reality of the situation hit everyone at once. The hovercraft was perfect for water rescue, but it wasn't equipped as an ambulance. They needed the rescue truck, the one still blocked by Margaret's strategically parked Lexus. Lisa Morrison was kneeling beside her son, holding his hand as the medical team worked. "Is he going to be okay?" "He needs immediate hospital care," Jake said gently, "but we need to get our truck through to transport him." All eyes turned to Margaret, who was still standing in the same spot where Lisa had slapped her, looking like she'd been struck by lightning rather than an open palm. The weight of everyone's stare seemed to crush her remaining defiance. "Move your car, Margaret." The voice belonged to Robert Chen, Danny's father, and a longtime Sunset Harbor resident. Jake hadn't noticed him arrive, but now he saw that what had started as a small group of Tyler's family had grown into a crowd of neighbors. "Move it now." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The rules clearly state." "Screw your rules." This came from Patricia Williams, whose own granddaughter had nearly drowned in these same waters 2 summers ago. "That boy could have died because of your power trip." The crowd began to murmur agreement, their voices growing louder and more agitated. Jake realized the situation was about to get ugly in a different way. A mob of angry neighbors wasn't going to help Tyler, and it certainly wasn't going to help his own team do their job. "Folks, let's focus on getting Tyler to the hospital," Jake called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to managing crisis situations. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to move your vehicle now so we can transport this patient." Margaret looked around at the faces surrounding her, neighbors she'd spent years alienating with petty enforcement actions, property disputes, and bureaucratic power plays. For the first time, she seemed to understand that her authority was entirely dependent on people's willingness to accept it. I didn't know," she stammered. "You didn't want to know," Lisa Morrison said quietly, never taking her eyes off Tyler. "All you cared about was your precious rules." Margaret fumbled for her car keys, her hands shaking. But as she started toward her Lexus, the sound of sirens filled the air. Multiple sirens, police, paramedics, and what sounded like a fire engine. "Great," Jake muttered under his breath. In all the chaos, he'd forgotten that Margaret had called the police to report them for trespassing. 3 police cruisers, an ambulance, and another fire truck came screaming down the beach access road, only to come to an abrupt halt behind Margaret's blocking vehicle. Jake watched through the windshield as Officer Janet Rodriguez, HOA, responded to more than her share of HOA disputes over the years, climbed out of the lead cruiser with an expression of barely contained irritation. "What exactly is going on here?" Rodriguez called out as she approached the group. Margaret seemed to regain some of her composure at the sight of law enforcement. "Officer Rodriguez, thank goodness you're here. These people have trespassed on private property with an unauthorized vehicle and have completely ignored proper emergency protocols." Rodriguez looked at Margaret, then at Tyler being treated by the medical team, then at the hovercraft sitting on the beach like a mechanical whale. Her expression went through several rapid changes before settling on something that looked suspiciously like disgust. "Mrs. Whitfield, are you telling me that you called police to report emergency responders for?" 3 hours later, Jake sat in the hospital waiting room with a cup of terrible coffee, still wearing his salt-stained wetsuit. Tyler Morrison was stable, cold and exhausted, but alive and expected to make a full recovery. The doctors said another 10 minutes in the water might have been too late. Lisa Morrison approached him with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tyler's awake and asking for the cool helicopter guy." Jake smiled. "It's a hovercraft, but I'll take it. How's he doing?" "Embarrassed mostly. Keeps apologizing for getting caught in the current." Lisa's relief was palpable. "The doctor said if you hadn't reached him when you did." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew how close it had been. Danny appeared in the waiting room doorway, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Jake, you need to see this." He handed over his phone, which was displaying a local news website. The headline read, "HOA President Blocks Drowning Rescue, Gets Schooled by Hovercraft." Below it was a photo someone had taken of the SR6 soaring over the dunes, with Margaret's shocked face clearly visible in the foreground. "It's gone viral," Danny explained. 3 million views in 2 hours. The comments section is, "Well, let's just say Margaret's not going to be winning any popularity contests." Jake scrolled through a few of the comments. They ranged from outraged to hilarious, but the consensus was clear. Margaret Whitfield had become the internet's newest villain. "Gets better," Danny continued. "Channel 7 wants to interview you about emergency response protocols, and apparently, the county commissioner's office has been flooded with calls praising the hovercraft program." Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Santos. "Check your email. County wants to expand the hovercraft program to 3 more stations. Guess someone finally sees the value in going over obstacles instead of through them." But the real satisfaction came when Officer Rodriguez appeared in the waiting room an hour later. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, settling into the chair next to Jake. "Mrs. Whitfield has been removed from her position as HOA president. Emergency vote called by the board this afternoon. Unanimous." Jake raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Turns out blocking emergency vehicles during a life-threatening situation is frowned upon by insurance companies. Their liability carrier threatened to drop coverage unless she was removed immediately. Rodriguez grinned. "Also, the state attorney general's office is reviewing whether her actions constitute criminal interference with emergency services." And the HOA new president is Robert Chen, Danny's dad. First order of business was issuing a formal apology and establishing a written policy ensuring unrestricted emergency access. They're also donating $50,000 to the county rescue service. Rodriguez paused. "Oh, and they're naming the new public beach access point after Tyler." Jake shook his head in amazement. "What about Margaret?" "Last I heard, she was packing, selling the house and moving to Arizona. Apparently, the neighbors have made it clear she's no longer welcome in paradise." 2 weeks later, Jake stood on the newly christened Tyler Morrison Beach access point, watching the SR6 hovercraft conduct a training exercise. The county had fast-tracked the expansion program, and 3 more coastal stations would have hovercraft by the end of the month. Danny jogged up from the water, having just completed his first successful hovercraft rescue simulation. "I still can't believe that thing exists," he said, pulling off his helmet. "Best part is, it doesn't need anyone's permission to save lives," Jake replied. Tyler Morrison himself was there for the training exercise, fully recovered and sporting a Hovercraft Rescue Team t-shirt that Maria Santos had given him. His near-death experience had inspired him to join the junior lifeguard program, and Jake had a feeling the kid would make a hell of a rescue swimmer someday. "Hey, Captain Morrison," Tyler called out, jogging over with the enthusiasm only teenagers could muster. "Think I could get a ride in that thing someday?" Jake grinned. "Kid, after what you've been through, I think you've earned it." As the sun set over Pelican Cove, Jake reflected on the strange turn of events that had brought them all together. Margaret Whitfield had tried to use bureaucracy as a weapon against human compassion, but she'd forgotten a fundamental truth. When lives are on the line, the only rule that matters is doing whatever it takes to save them. Sometimes that meant going around obstacles, sometimes it meant going through them, and sometimes, if you were lucky enough to have a federal grant and a really good pilot, it meant going right over them at 40 miles per hour. The hovercraft sat quietly on the beach, its engines cooling in the salt air, ready for the next emergency. Because there would always be a next emergency, and there would always be people who needed help. But now, at least in this corner of the world, there would never again be a locked door between the rescuers and the people who needed saving. Margaret Whitfield had learned that the hard way. The rest of the community had learned something far more valuable, that the best rules are the ones that help people, and the worst ones are the ones that get in the way of helping people. Jake's radio crackled to life as he headed back to the station. Another call, another chance to make a difference. He smiled as he climbed into the truck, already mentally checking the hovercraft's fuel levels. After all, you never knew when you might need to fly over someone's authority to save a life.